Okay, folks, we're gonna jump in today to Unreal. And what we're gonna look at is like modular design inside Unreal. And this is a thing I mentioned. I think the last couple of weeks I've probably mentioned that at least once. And it's a way a lot of games are made. So I'll actually show you first with the starter content how some of the assets are made basically to be modular and slot together like Lego pieces. And then we're going to use the BSP brushes to build up some of our own kind of static meshes, our own modular pieces of level design. Okay, that will allow us basically put bits together and kind of create a level the way we want to create it. Okay, so I'm going to just launch Unreal and I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to use starter content. And that's just, I want to show you the starter content basically. So I'm going to create, as always, creating a game. I'm going to go first person. And one thing we're going to do this week is we're going to remove the gun and shooting from first person. So that it's a bit nicer. Making sure with starter content is selected. And I am going to call this modular level design. And create project. Let's see if I can wear glasses with this face mask and nose. Yeah. So folks, here's our level. This is like the default level. Okay, that starting shooting thing as a default is kind of really annoying at the start. So the first thing we're going to do today is just get rid of that. Okay, and it's going to be our first time kind of interacting with blueprints, which is how our character controller is created. So I'm just going to click the camera here in the game world. Okay, when you select something like the first person control equivalent of the camera attached, it's going to show you the camera view inside the viewport here. And it's also over here on the world outline. It has it there. If we want to remove the gun and stuff like that, how do you think we do that? Okay. This is called first person character. There's a button here that says edit first person character. Okay. So with first person character selected, we go over to the world outliner and we hit this button, edit first person character. This opens up a new window, but it's just a tab. I'm just going to drag this tab into beside this tab as well. Okay. If anyone's having issues with setup, I can log in. No. Let's take a minute. Come back here and then we'll see if it's done. So folks, this here, what this has done is opened up in a new window. So when this opens up, it opens up as a new window. And it's got all this kind of, what for most people is probably going to be gibberish here. These are just nodes, and that's how we do simple coding inside my work. Now, because this is a tab, one of the nice things about Unreal is we can tab this beside our map, so we can have multiple maps open in different tabs, and we can have our first person character blueprint open as well. So, one thing I'm going to do here is this input actions fire event. I'm going to right click on that and go to break node links, and you'll see it gets rid of the line to that. Okay. So if I save the game now, hit compile on this blueprint, go back to my map and press play. When I click the mouse, I'm no longer shooting a ball. Okay, I'm still able to move and jump, it's just I've disconnected the fire action. Inside this tab, there are sub-tabs here of this viewport, and one is called Viewport. And it shows us the different models and stuff here. This thing called Mesh 2P, which is our character mesh. We can scroll down on the right hand side, and there should be an option for visible. We can tick that, that's going to make the hands invisible. And we can select the gun. There's two versions of the gun, one is for VR. Basically, we can do that. And now if we compile and save, jump back into the engine, we now aren't shooting tennis balls and we don't have a gun anymore. That makes sense? Okay, it's just a nice way to make it a bit nicer when we're moving around the level. That first person gun and stuff kind of isn't necessarily the nicest thing to have.
Would it break the script or blueprint if you just
It might give you a couple of errors because it's going to be referencing those, I think. But try it and see. Is basically what I would say, and see what it does. Okay. Similarly, is by just hiding them, like it's not rendering them. It doesn't cost us anything. It's just that they're not showing. Basically. So that's kind of a simple way to get it. So okay. So do folks want to try do that first? Okay, just set up a new level and try and get that done. I'll just go around and help anyone who needs a hand with resume the recording. Go. So folks, here's my level. I've got my invisible player. I don't have the arms or the gun anymore. Okay, which is kind of the way I want it. Now I'm going to create a new. I'm going to make sure that first person character is saved. You know what? I'll actually create this inside in this level. It might be useful to build this up inside in this area. Okay. What I'm going to do is build up. Basically, so have any of you ever seen a house being built? Or it works on a construction site or anything like that? So basically, when you're building a house, the panels that like make up the walls tend to come in sheets that are 8x4. Have people seen those before? They're the big sheets, they're kind of hard for one person to carry, but 8x4 is the size of 4 foot, which is about yay big, by 8 foot, which is wider than that. That makes sense? Okay, and your 8 foot is basically floor to ceiling, and your 4 foot is the width of the board basically on the wall. So, like, somewhere like that is like about 4 foot, and that's one of the panels. The reason they do that for housing is that like it's cheaper. If every panel is the same size, you're doing less cutting and everything kind of slots into place. So what we're going to do is try and create some panels. Now we don't have to work at 8x4. We'll actually work at like 200 by 300 is going to be our base size for our smallest piece. And then we can do bigger versions and smaller versions as we need them. Okay, does that make sense? Cool. And we can make things like, if we wanted to make these panels on the wall here, we can think of ways we'd make those using this sort of method. Okay? So, the first thing I'm going to do is go to Geometry on the left-hand side. Okay, select Geometry, and I'm going to just drag in a box. Drag in a box, which is here. I'm going to press F on the keyboard to focus in on the box and try and get a nice viewing location on it. I'm going to leave the X value at 200. The Y value is my thickness. What sort of value do you think we should put on that if it's going to be a wall section? 100. 100 is probably even too big. You know, that would be like quite a chunky wall. 50, 20, 10, something like that. 20 is what I'm going to go with because it gives it some thickness. But it's kind of thickness is in proportion to it. And then on the Z value, the height, what did I say our height unit was going to be? 300. Okay, and that represents 3 meters. Now, one thing is, if you can see when I did this, it like expanded up and then equally, so it's no longer resting on the ground. Now there are a few ways I can try and make this rest on the ground by like trying to eyeball it and making sure if I have a snap of 10 on, it probably will rest on the ground. If I'm finding it hard to get this to stand on the ground, I can put it here above the ground, somewhere that I know is like floating in the air. And then on your keyboard, if with it selected, if you hit the end key, END, end key, it's going to drop it down to be level with the ground. Okay? It's just useful because it's going to put everything at the same level. You won't have boxes at different heights and stuff like that. Okay? Yeah. That's a really good question if it's underneath. So there's one easy way to check this out. Let's drag that, let's say there, and hit the end key. And it's not doing anything because it's going through it. So it has to be above it. So I think what end key does basically is projects downwards until it needs something, and then it says like place this at that height. No, it's going to whatever. So I can show you here how this might be different. Let's say I have this door here, and I hit the end key. It's going to lower it to that surface. It's going to find the flat surface. If it's a curved surface, it's probably going to find like the juice of that curved surface or something. I'm not 100% certain. We can test that out in a while. Okay, cool. So I'm going to just undo that because I want this to be on the ground. I don't like that it's floating on me. And hit the end key. Get to hit the ground now. This basically is now like one of my modular panels. Okay, and this is going to allow me to build out the rest of my level. Okay. Now, if I was creating a flat box, empty room, I might just have panels like that. And I'm going to show you examples of stuff that looks like that. So if I go into starter content, is it in props? Sorry, it's not in props. Yeah, it's architecture. Okay, and you'll see here there's walls 400 by 200, 400 by 300, 400 by 400, 500 by 500. Okay, and these walls are just like cubes scaled up to that size. Does that make sense? And then there's some of them, let's say, that have a door cut in them. This is in starter content, architecture. It's not too important to be aware. It's just so that you know that we're trying to build up our own version of this. These are all flat, plain white. We want to develop our own that are maybe a little bit nicer looking, maybe a little bit more detailed. Okay. And your goal for the next week is going to be to take your the level layout you've done at this stage, and you're going to turn it into a sci-fi environment with some more detailed modular assets. Okay. So we'll see how we can use this technique to kind of make this asset look a little bit more interesting, kind of like the corridor you might see on a spaceship. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to select this brush, hit F. I'm going to try and make the screen a bit bigger as well. I'm going to go to my brush editing mode. Now, if I click this edge here, there's a button here called split. Does anyone want to guess what that's going to do? Yeah, it's basically, it's not so much good, it's not going to create two new models out of this. What it's going to do is it's going to put a ring of vertices around here. Okay, so that means we're going to be able to edit the shape then. So, if I select that and hit the split button, it can be real tricky to get the edges. Sometimes it'll keep selecting surfaces. You just have to get the mouse right over the edge. Yeah. So it's just, it could be just one of them. Just like one edge and hit split, and it should draw the flag on it. No, it will always split along the line. Because we're only selecting a line, the only way to split a line is to put it in the middle. Right? I think it will always, let's see what it says when we select. So, we can hover over this and see what it says. I think it will always be halfway. straight blocking values or freeform geometry like the assumed anchor points will be created with two anchor points or using the space bar to create an answer. Right, that doesn't necessarily sound right. But I think it will always split basically in the middle of the line. But that's fine because we're going to be able to move these pretty easily. And all we want to do is split this up into some interesting geometry. So the top here, I'm going to split it maybe 2 or 3 more times. This is where it can be a bit tricky to select these lines. Then I hit split. Hit split, and then the bottom down here, I might. And you know what? Up here as well, I might do one more split around here, just because this is kind of going to be close to eye level. And that's where I might want the most interesting geometry. Okay, and now we can start looking at how we might edit this, folks. So, do you think we should edit this in the perspective viewport? No. Okay, what we're going to do, like, we could if we wanted, it's just maybe a bit more tricky to do in the perspective viewport. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to switch to the side view. And I think it's going to be front for this, just because of the way this level is rotated. So if we hit front, press F on the keyboard, it's going to zoom in. Okay, and we now have these points here. So we can drag these around. I'm going to leave snapping on so that these snap. So I have my grid snap on here. Okay, I'm going to try and create like a little bit of a, let's see, not necessarily like that. Just a little bit of like a curve sort of thing here. Something like this that we might see on the like deck of our spaceship or our science fiction setting. Drag these bits out. So again, it doesn't matter where these lines are because we can actually move them down and kind of manipulate the positions of it. Okay, so now if I jump back to the perspective viewport, cool. So this kind of looks like, if you ever watch like Star Trek or something like that, you know the idea of like these carpeted wall type things going around the corridors. It's something kind of along the lines of that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, if you just created it, you can undo. Otherwise, you might just have to live with it. I'm not sure. You might be able to hit the optimize button and that might work, or it might not. If you've all surfaces selected on the object. So folks, then I'm going to go back to select mode here. Okay. Select mode, I've got my geometry here. I could tidy this up a bit by like putting these lines in line with those. It's fine, it doesn't affect anything. Okay. If you're creating this as a 3D asset inside 3D Studio Max, you might do that to make it a bit more optimized. So, what I'm going to do is select this object, hold down Alt on the keyboard. Okay, and I'm now able to build out different geometry using this. Does that make sense? You can, yeah. So you can do that, and that's one way to do it. The other way is to just use kind of two of the, connect them together basically. The one thing we wouldn't want to do is if we extrude it, let's say to 500, let's say 1,000 long or something like that, your texture is going to get kind of stretched a bit. So sometimes it's more useful to have smaller bits that we can change and tweak. We can have a variation that's like panel damage, panel clean, panel graffiti. You know what I mean? And then you can put smaller panels together to get more variety so that you don't get. If you ever see like repeating textures, sometimes in games you want to break that up a little bit. But you'd still have to then delete half of it, wouldn't you? Yeah, you'd still like delete the part that you're like splitting. But one of the things I want to show you here is I'm going to leave. So I've created a duplicate of this here. And I'm going to press F on the keyboard to focus in on it. Down here under brush settings on the right hand side, there's a little tick box there. And I can click this button, create static mesh. And I'm going to save this in content. And I might call this, let's say, something like 200 by 300. Yeah, 200 by 300 is probably fine for that. Then I hit create static mesh. And this object is now a static mesh. Okay, it's no longer affected by like the brush geometry tools and stuff like that. What this means is now, as we develop the level, I should use this as a placeholder in the level, and the artist then can come in as they're working on the level, and they can replace this static mesh with the correct one, like the final detail. Does that make sense? Because we're using prefab, these basically become placeholders that are replaced with the proper thing. Okay, and the artist knows, okay, this is a 300 by 200 panel. Cool, that's just a placeholder. We can replace that with something that looks like that. We could also, I'm just going to apply a material to this. Go to content, starter content. I'm going to apply the metal polished steel material to this. Cool. And there's our wall now with that material. I'm going to save this level. And if I create a new level now, I'm just going to go with default. And I jump back out here to content. Okay. What I can do now is this asset, because I've converted it to a static mesh, I can start using it in other levels. Does that make sense? I can now use this to build out other levels in the game using the same asset. It basically makes its way into the library for us to reuse. Yeah. So, to convert this to, I'm just going to save this. I'm going to call this like test map. Oh, no. Sorry, it's minimal default. No. Starter map? No. First person example. Sorry. So here's my level now. Okay. To convert this to a static mesh, it's just select it. And under brush settings, you'll see there's this little arrow. You click that and there's a button there called create static mesh. Okay? And that's just going to convert it to a static mesh. Now, what we want to do is, I want to keep one of these always a TSP, so that, and I'll show you why I do that, so that now I can create another box, and I'm going to make this say 150, 200, 200, that's fine. And I'm going to make this subtractive. And I'm going to hit end on the keyboard. Sorry. Let me drag this out and hit end. Okay, folks, and now I've got this. So I'm going to select the two of these, hold Alt on the keyboard. And then I can hit create static mesh. And I can call this 200 by 300 door. Okay folks, and now I've got the door that I can move around the level. And let me turn off my filters. And I can start dragging in these pieces and start aligning everything together basically. Does that make sense, folks? Cool. So now we've got like our standard like kind of components. I'll show you in a few minutes how to snap that stuff together. But basically by using these we're now able to create a level in quite a smart way, and we can create windows and stuff like that and link everything up with nice kind of custom assets. Is that okay? Yeah. Which? Yeah. So that's where, sorry, I just threw the door in there. But basically, if you go here, let's say, I'm going to hit F on the keyboard. And I'm going to go for left view. So it's the grid here you're going to use to align to this. Now you can probably, I don't know if you can see this box is kind of off the grid. If I right click, if I right click on one of these vertices, it's going to snap it to the grid. And you can see here, my grid is, basically I've got 20 on this side and 30 on this side. How would I manage to put that in the exact center? Yeah, I'm going to change my grid snap to 5. And now I can turn my grid snap back to 10. And that's perfectly in the center. So if I go back now to perspective, that is perfectly in the center. Does that make sense? Okay, it's just, I was doing that real rough there in Viewport, but yeah, you probably should go into like the front viewports and make sure things are fairly precise. Now, at the same time, because this is going to get replaced by a production ready asset, it's not the end of the world. The stuff isn't quite exactly the way it should be. What you're doing here is representing what you want it to represent. So it represents a door and a wall, and it does that fairly effectively. That makes sense? Yeah. Cool. Any questions, folks? Cool. We're going to take a break there, and we will come back at, let's say, 4:05. Okay? Cool. So, what we have now is we've got our like brush for this. We've converted one of those into a static mesh, and we converted a door into a static mesh as well. Okay, so these are things we can delete and place in the level as much as we want. One thing that can be kind of tricky is, right, if I wanna, gotta just make this window a little bit smaller. If I want to line this up exactly, it sometimes can be pretty tricky. Because they're created on the same grid, that's fine. But sometimes, let's say if I had this off on the grid somewhere like this. I'm hoping that's off the 10 grid. Now, as I try and like position this relative to that object, maybe I'm still on the grid. Yeah, can you see there? I can't actually get that aligned properly. Can you see the issue down here? Because it's kind of off the grid, I'm finding it hard to like make these actually match up and line up. And what we want ideally is when this is snapped properly, there'll be no like daylight visible between these two objects. There's daylight visible between them and these are the side. So, first thing we need to do, we're going to do a thing called a Vertex Snap. Which means that instead of snapping to the grid, we're going to snap to a vertex. Okay, so I'm going to select this like center circle here. And if I hold down the V key on the keyboard while I do that, so I'm going to left click on that circle here, hold down V on the keyboard, and you'll see here it's snapping to vertices on the ground. Okay, and kind of all over the place. So, there's a few things I need to do. First, I want to move this pivot point is what that's called, is what, and then it's called pivot point. I want to move it to this right hand corner. Okay? To move this pivot point, the first thing I do is hover my mouse over the white ball at the center of it, press the middle mouse button, and I can place this wherever I want. Okay? This is part of it. What's the problem at the minute with moving this? Yeah, it's hard to get it exactly where I want it. Okay, so I'm just gonna move my view here somewhere. And there it's Alt. So what I want to do is try and get this over one of the pivot points exactly, and it's a little bit fiddly. Actually, sorry, I might have to turn off. Sorry, I've got surface snapping on here, and that's not, which I think might be creating an issue. Yeah, cool. Sorry, so it was snapping to the surface there because I had that snapping turned on. So once I turn that off, I can move this wherever I like. So what I need to do is, as I move this, I hold down Alt and V. Alt V and middle mouse button. Okay, it's a complex enough interaction. So you have to hover your cursor over the ball in the middle, hold down the middle mouse button, and Alt and V at the same time, and it will move this pivot point to the top. And then, now when I'm moving this, if I want to align it with this object, I just use the left mouse button to drag this. And so you kind of have to get over this. That shouldn't be moving. And left click and so this is one of the things that can sometimes be tricky in this perspective mode. It can take the snap way off. But yeah, cool. So it snapped it there because I pushed the pivot point back. But that's basically how you snap the things together. So I lost the pivot point together. So you have to middle mouse button Alt and V to move this to a pivot point, and then just use your pivot point. Get it to snap. And that way then we're going to be able to align kind of all these walls beside each other. Okay? So as folks point out, we could, let's say if we wanted, we could create a longer, we could extrude this side here and have a longer wall section with a door. We can create wall sections with windows on it. We can basically place all these sections together. Now, I just want to ask a question. If we rotate this 90 degrees, actually, I'm not going to use this one. I'm going to drag in one of these. I'm just going to roughly position this just for now. Do you think there's any issue there in that corner join? It's opposite. As long as we line up the points, like as long as we snap the points, it should be fine for blocking out the level. When we're actually using level geometry, sometimes we might have like corner pieces that are a single bit by themselves. Like that the texture will overlap. So you shouldn't, because this should obscure text on that. Okay, so to test that out, let's see what happens. So let's go into starter content, materials, and I'm going to put brick clay on that one, and let's go basic wall here. And let's press play. Where's that? What's here? Is there an issue there? Which? Is that something happening there? Yeah, sorry, the way they brought up there. Now the one thing is, because we haven't built our lighting, we'll just try build lighting and see. What we might get is, it might put like a little dark shadow along where the two meet. Like that 0% up level. And we'll see, do we get that, there's a term for that, I can't remember the name of it. Where it just puts a little shadow where two surfaces meet, because this dark wall is being dark and close to that. I think definitely if we had high quality lighting, I think we're pre-production lighting, or low quality, so it might not quite do it, but we might get a feel for it. So has it done it? So you can see it's definitely put some shadows in. If we press play. Yeah. There's no major issue there. Does that make sense? Like, maybe it doesn't look great, like it shouldn't look that perfect. But if we wanted, we could create a corner piece. And if we wanted to do that, it's fairly straightforward as well. Which one is... So again, I'm going back to the one that I've left as BSP. Going to hit Alt and drag it that way. I'm going to rotate this 90. Actually, you know what? We'll go for the top view. I'm going to turn on Grid Snap there. If something's gone off the grid, you can hover your mouse over it and right click, and it's going to align it to the grid. So now let's jump into perspective viewport. Cool. Does that look okay? So we can select the two of these, and we can do our trick of converting them to a static mesh. We can call this a 200 by 300 corner. We'll create static mesh. There it is, a single mesh. Does that make sense? So now any of that cleanup that's going to happen around that joint, our artists can do that in the 3D studio. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's kind of the way we want to be working, so that things are all fairly modular. So now if I jump back out, right to the content, I can start to pretty quickly Sorry, that's not the one I want. Basically build stuff out like that, add in a door here. And I'm just going to eyeball it, get it in position. Okay, does that make sense? So you pretty quickly like build up a corridor in a corner of a room. You have longer sections, smaller sections, whatever type sections you need. The one thing that I'm going to show you there is if I drag this, we were talking about texture clipping there where the corners met. This is easier to see on my screen than it is here, so I'll try and zoom out of it. Easy what's going on there. What's happened there is we have two identical surfaces in the exact same place with materials overlapping one another and they're basically fighting. Because what's happening is the engine is telling like the graphics card, these two surfaces are the same place with the same materials, and the graphics card goes, I run this one, then this one, this one, this one, and just doesn't know which one to do. So if we see stuff like that, it just means there's two surfaces overlapping. And we should see it be resolved once we move them out of an overlap. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, that's just a thing you basically want to avoid. Okay. Using these tools, we can create like whatever we want. Now we can create like floor panels really easily. What dimensions do you think we put on a floor panel? Yeah, so we're going to leave it maybe 200 by 200 and we're still going to go for 20 on the thickness. Does that make sense? And for this, I'm going to hit create static mesh. I'm going to call this 200 by 200 floor. Hit create static mesh. And now I've got floor panels that I can just basically lay out throughout my lab. Why do you think I'd want to build the floor like this? Why not just use a flat plane? Yeah, exactly. Different rooms I can have different textures on the floor, you know, and like some rooms might have grates. You've probably seen this in games before, especially sci-fi. You'll see like there's like maybe a section of grates, and then there's a section of floor, and maybe a section of like wood or metal or something like that. Okay, and that's all made up by combining these different elements. And because they're all pretty much the same size, it means these pieces will largely fit together. Okay, which is kind of what we're looking to do here. So then if we might want to have default stairs. The key thing here is step height and number of steps. We want to keep the step height the same. If we want to get this to be 3-meter stairs, what do we need to change? At the moment, each step is 20 high, and there's 10 of them, so it's 200 high. How do we get to 300 high? I guess. We could change the step height, but then you're actually going to have an awkward step height, and the character controller might move up it. So the simple way to do it is just change the number of steps to 15, and that's going to give us our 300 high stairs. Does that make sense? Okay, because we're basically using that. And again, we could combine this with like the wall panels or something like that. Let's say this here, if we go. I'm going to move the stairs a little bit out of the way. Alt on the keyboard is going to duplicate this. Do you think there's anything I should do here, or change or tweak? Yeah. Yeah, so basically I might want to just change the scale on this one here. And I might even want to, so holding control, select multiple of these, just pull this out so that it's not interfering with the stairs so much. Yeah, so something like that, where they're not really touching off each other so much. And then you might like put a rail or something beside it here. Does that make sense? Okay. And then you combine that all into a static mesh section and you'd be like, okay, this is my static mesh for the stairs. Okay. You maybe duplicate your rail so that it's okay, so we're basically creating a library of assets we can use and reuse across the level. Now, a couple of things I want to show you on BSP, or sorry, geometry. It's not necessarily called BSP anymore, but so apologies about that. So let's say one thing I can do with creating a box like this. If I look inside this, it's empty at the minute. I can hit this button here, hollow, and set a wall thickness of 20. And now if I fly inside this, there's a room inside there. And to highlight that a little more clear, then I just cut into that with this. This brush I'm going to make subtractive. There it is. Hey, can you see what that's done? The hollow brush. Yeah. So creating a cube that's hollow gives you like hollow. This is the same. Sorry, I meant to say someone had mentioned on the Discord about a cylinder. Okay, about creating like an arc. So this is when we create a cylinder by default. It's got our Z, our outer radius, so that's our height and our radius. The number of sides, what do you think giving it more sides will do? Yeah, exactly, yeah. So like we can do something like that, and it's going to be pretty perfectly smooth. What do you think hollow would do? I'm going to decrease my graphics card is going crazy right now. Yeah. And then, so here now, once I do this, I get an inner radius, which is slightly different. So if I want this to be 20 thick walls, I just need to change the inner radius to 180. Does that make sense? Okay, it's a hollow tube. Similar thing, if I take this box here and duplicate it, okay, I'm able to cut into that shape. So if I want it to be a semicircle, I can do something like this. That makes sense?
Yep. You see this subtractive in English?
Yeah.
And you have its own subtractive.
Not easy. Once we convert them to static mesh, the subtractive brush won't affect it anymore. So let's say if I go with that here. So if I move this over here, because that's a static mesh, it's not going to affect it, but it's going to affect this. Now, one thing I can do is I can change the order of things. So I'm going to set this brush to first. Okay, and that happens first and everything else is cut out of it. So then if I select this and now make this the new first, it should just cut out of those two. Okay, so now the brush doesn't, even though the brush is overlapping that object, because of the order, which is this thing here, there's no great, as far as I know, there's no great way to visualize the order of these. You just have to move things to first or last and then decide. So first is like the first operation that gets done. So even though this box is the last thing technically that was created, we basically set it to first so that that was cut out, and then this whole thing was built, and that hole was cut out of it. And then we took this cylinder and said, hey, this is actually first. So it was as if this cylinder was done first. That's cut out, and this is built. Does that make sense? It performs those operations in an order. Does that make sense? It's kind of complex, and it's not easy to visualize like in Photoshop where you can see the layers and stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, any questions on that, folks? One thing there's a couple more things I want to just jump into. Spiral stairs are a thing we see every year. And I'm going to place this here. I'm going to decrease the radius on this a bit. Let's see if we can make this kind of the internal stairs of this object, whatever it is. Okay, so I'm going to press play. Can I crouch? No. Okay. So we can see already one slight issue because of the radius of the stairs. So I'm just going to rotate this a little. So the steps are coming out there. I think that should work a bit better if we're climbing up it. Now, what's wrong with these stairs? Yeah. Anything else with them? Yeah, spiral staircases are pretty twisty. They're pretty awkward to navigate and use. Okay? You can use them a little bit. Things that tend to work better is doing like a switchback type stairs where you have, let's say if you want to go up in that sort of pattern, you can just do you can, but they're never. One of the things we're trying to navigate a spiral staircase is you're trying to kind of move and rotate. It's an awkward movement to do generally in games. It's very rare I've seen it feel good, basically. So just be very conscious of using it because it's not it often doesn't work very well. So instead, the kind of thing you can do is, and I'm just going to move this block over to here. Where was that? Now the thing I can do is go this. Okay, does that make sense? Like that is a much smoother type of stairs to go up. And you can do all sorts of things with that. You can have two stairs at either side, come to a position in the center, and then go up along a central track. Does that make sense? Or else you can have ones where like there's one in the middle and it splits off left and right. You'd see that in like huge fancy houses and stuff. Okay, and it actually creates a more interesting space. This spiral staircase, it tends not to feel great because you're kind of tracking the camera around something and you're trying to not fall off and things. And it's a funny sort of interaction. We don't in our lives. I don't think we interact with spiral staircases all that often. Some people might have them in their house, but they're rare enough because a normal staircase tends to work a little bit better. So bear that in mind. Now, one thing I don't think I've shown you yet, and which I think is kind of important. Oh, yeah. What's happening here? No collision. Okay? That is one thing. When you convert these to static meshes, they don't necessarily have collisions in them. To fix that, you just right click on it and hit edit, whatever the name of your asset is. In this case, it's 200 by 300 door. Okay, this allows us to like do things like kind of control the collision and stuff like that, so we can see the simple collision. We can see here the complex collision. There's no like simple collision on this. We can add some of these simple ones, but because this is BSP and we don't care too much, we just want accurate collisions. We can apply box collisions to this, but it doesn't mean we block out the door and stuff. So over here on the right hand side, so collision complexity, you can change this to use complex collision as simple. And hit save. And now if I press play, where was that door? It's this door. Okay, I'm now colliding with that. And the other thing is I realized my door is too small, which it was maybe a little too late to make that realization. Right. How did I get through it there? It's just doing a more accurate collision for that door as well. Does that make sense? So you force the complex collision and it's going to use the geometry of the model to control the collision. Okay? Are there any questions on that?
When you went into
the prefab, that's now. So I'll drag another one of those doors out. It's a really good question. Let's put it here. Going to lift it out of the ground a bit so that the door works. And I know which one it is. So it's this floaty one. Okay. So that one now has proper collision as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. So you're basically editing the prefab when you're inside that mode. There's other things you can do there. Yeah, you can change the material here if you want, and that'll affect the prefab. So let's say we go for this brick clay. Save this. Jump back to the map. It's going to update that for any of those prefabs. Is that okay? Or for any of those instances if that's static mesh. Alright. That's what's useful about doing this workflow, because it means our artists can go in, swap out models. It doesn't affect the functionality of the game, but the model just like replaces the one that we have as a placeholder. So we're able to create like a world that feels kind of like a spaceship, because we've got like these sort of spaceshipy corridors. But it's maybe not perfect, but our artists can go in and kind of fix that up. Okay. Any questions about that, folks? Cool. So that's where we're going to leave it pretty much on creating geometry. Ideally, what we want to be able to do with geometry is block out spaces and create a sense of the space. Basically, we don't necessarily want to have 100% detail, but sometimes having things like, if we were building this room, having things like these panels on the wall, okay, having this cutout on the door, it creates a cool sense of like how the space sort of works. Does that make sense? It makes it feel, as opposed to the first simple blockout, I think everyone did this last week because that's what I was looking for. You just had like a square running along there, yeah? An extruded edge. But now, for this week, what I want to do is try and think of what that space would be if it was in a science fiction game, and try and think of like what details might be on the walls, what does it look like, how do you kind of have some variation. Yeah. Whatever you want. So, if like you're really into like sci-fi, like, let's say a Star Trek or something where everything's kind of perfect and pristine, that's fine. If it's more kind of cyberpunk and things are a bit junky and you're like, you want to extrude out some, like, other stuff you can do here is, let's say, grab a cylinder, change number of sides, so let's go 24. We can change the radius to maybe 5, size 5. You can start maybe like putting in things like just pipes and decorations and lights and stuff. Does that make sense? And like, let's say here, if I apply starter content, Oh, sorry, that is that grid. I'm not taking that material. So I want to go select and select all. Oh no. I want to select all in this brush, which is it's not applying the material there. What mode am I in? Oh, yeah. I'm not sure why that's not fully applying to it. But yeah, basically, I don't know why. You might have to drag and drop them on. Easier way is probably create a new cylinder with that material selected, and it'll have that material on it. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong there. But basically, you can set it up that it has that material and you can place it. And try to create the look you like. Again, you don't have to go too detailed into like, don't worry about texturing or anything like that. It's just to create the sense of like the sort of sci-fi space you want. Okay, so the idea is you've imagined the inside of a building. And you probably, I think most people have thought of it in like conventional terms. Lots of people have like toilets and sitting rooms and stuff. And then think about what does that mean if you convert that to a science fiction space? Is this someone's quarters? How do you create this out of the sort of Lego block parts that you're going to make? Does that make sense? Yeah. Any questions on that? Cool. Great. Then we're going to leave it there. Oh, sorry, someone. You can, but to be honest, for this week, we just want to focus on like creating a sense of the space. Because if we put lots of like pretty details in there, we'll get lost in the details and not appreciate the space for what it is. So just simple grey, white box. If you want some colored textures to highlight things, stuff like that. Just keep it fairly simple, but have your own modular walls and stuff like that. Is that okay? Cool. Great.
You add different materials to different sections to see that.
Yeah. So let's say here, let's say I want this tech panel. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. Sorry, I'll do it on this one. So that'll just apply to that surface that I've dragged it on. Does that make sense? So it's just by dragging it onto, it's going to automatically just pick a surface and it'll apply it to whatever's on that surface. So this, because that's a static mesh. So static mesh will apply to everything. So if you want separate ones, put the textures on before you convert it basically to a static mesh. And then it'll save you. So, no worries. So I will upload this